Well, hello, faithful politics listeners and watchers. If you're joining us via YouTube, it's good to see you guys. This is Josh Burtram. I'm your faithful host. And of course, we have with us our political host, Will. It's good to see you, Will.
Yeah, it's good to be seeing Josh. Thanks.
Awesome. And we have on the show today a special guest, Mike Madrid. He is a veteran American political consultant, one of the country's authoritative experts on Latino voters, and a co founder of the Lincoln Project. He's a graduate of Georgetown University. He served as the press secretary for the California Assembly Republican leader, as the political director for the California Republican Party, and as senior advisor to both Democrats and Republicans. He's a partner in the Grassroots Lab and which is a political consulting firm in California. And we have him on our show to talk about his latest book, The Latino Century. Thank you so much for coming on and jumping on with us today, Mike. It's great to have you.
Guys, I'm really excited about the conversation today. I really appreciate the chance to share some ideas with the both of you.
Yes, well, we're definitely looking forward to it. And, the first interaction that I had with the idea of the Latino vote, there was a book a while ago. It was called The Lamb and something. I'm butchering it because I'm forgetting, but it was this very prominent conservative Latino leader. And I remember reading the book and him talking about like how conservatives should really be paying attention to the Latino vote because Latinos are in many ways conservative as a constituency. And so I would love to get your thoughts on that and how you came to write a book called and about the Latino Century.
So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, Josh, but let's get into it. Let's try to do it. I grew up in
Absolutely.
Southern California, grew up in Ventura County, which is the area just north of Los Angeles County. Born in '70s and '80s when kind of the Latino population was just beginning to explode there. Come from a very strong Catholic tradition. As the way that I was raised, as a lot of people of Mexican descent historically have been. Back in the 1980s, about 80% of Mexicans in the country were of some Catholic tradition. That has changed dramatically. We'll get into that. It's a very fast growing part of the evangelical movement, Protestantism generally. And it's not specific to just the migrants here. It's all throughout all of Latin America. But those values, and not just necessarily kind of what we call in American vernacular social issues, but just the way of life, the idea of service to others, a constant looking out for the least among us. I remember one of the things that when people ask me why I got into politics and public service, it's because my earliest memories were when the first day I was able to peek up above the sink and see myself in the vanity. My mother said, every day you wake up and see yourself in the mirror, I want you to ask yourself the question, what am I doing for the least among us today? And that's I think, a question that many people of faith should be asking themselves, regardless of that tradition. Frankly, people not of faith should be asking themselves that question. And that kind of guided, my experience. And what I found was that was pretty common with the Latino electorate. And that really started to frame some of my understanding of the politicization, as we call it, of the community and why there was this divergence in both parties about what they imparted as their religious understanding of people onto the Latino vote and why it wasn't really connecting. And so my first experience was with Democrats. I came from a family of Democrats, and realizing that, from my opinion, a lot of what the Democratic Party was espousing and advocating was not helping the poor, was not helping the least among us. It was not fixing a lot of the tools like the public education system that we needed to raise ourselves and our communities and our families up. And at the same time, as much as I was a very strong adherent of this more Republican conservative philosophy, I wasn't seeing the genuineness or the sincerity of the heart of people in the party that were motivated primarily by service to others. It was a little bit more of a libertarian view of let people kind of sink and swim as they will. So the book becomes this, journey between navigating between the two of those and seeing which party does, both parties do things right, both parties do things wrong. And I wanted to kind of document some of my history, my experience, my perspective on what we're likely to see in the coming years.
That's really interesting. Now, I'm curious. So, because we talk a lot about faith and politics, we also talk about sort of the changing demographics of America. America's turning to be, or is going to look a lot browner, in generations to come. And for some, that actually worries a lot of people. Um, for others, it worries them because Democrats might think, oh, great, like more Latinos, more people of color means like our base is going to grow. This is the Democrats thinking, and we've read study after study, books. I mean, we actually interviewed a guy, Patrick Ruffini, who actually
Great book.
yeah. And it's like he provides a completely different narrative, and should be a wake up call for Democrats that are thinking this way. So if like what's your experience? What are your thoughts on the growing, how do I say, like browning? I don't know.
I call it the Latinization of America, although it's more than just the Latinization of America. We are witnessing an extraordinary growth with Asian American AAPI folks.
Mm-hmm.
And Patrick Ruffini's book was very, very instructive. And Patrick and I share a lot of ideas. I think we largely agree on what the demographic change is going to mean, and I'll explore it a little bit more. We do diverge a little bit in the thinking that he believes that this is just going to be sort of this, that the Republican Party will emerge as the working class party purely as an economic messaging point. I disagree a little bit. I believe incidentally that Latinos are the moderates in both parties. And this is where I think I disagree with the conclusion that Patrick comes to, is I believe that there's a tension in the Republican coalition between white voters, older white voters, frankly, older white voters of faith, right? Donald Trump's strongest base of support is with white evangelicals over 65. And the growing part of the demographic in their party, the Republican Party, my party, are U.S.-born Hispanic men of no religious tradition. If there is one, there is, it's kind of latent Catholicism of the past. And that coalition is tenuous. It's a tenuous coalition, but it's understandable in large part, I would argue, because of the excesses of the Democratic Party. And so as the Democrat, what's really key to understanding the shift in this country today is a lot of what Patrick documents regarding this educational divide. The single largest demarcation in American politics, and it has huge cultural ramifications, is the split between the Democratic Party, which is rapidly consolidating college-educated voters, which demographically are overwhelmingly white, and the Republican Party, which is consolidating non-college educated voters, which demographically in this country are overwhelmingly black and brown or non-white. And so the debate as to whether or not, minorities are going to continue to, quote unquote, behave like minorities did at the polling place is really the question that we're asking at this moment in time. And Will, you're exactly right. Back in the early mid 2000s, a really brilliant mind by the name of Rui Teixeira wrote a book called The Coming Democratic Majority. It was based on what they called the Coalition of the Ascendant. And the premise of the book was that all the Democrats had to do was just wait. And, whites would die out, non-whites would grow in number, the Democratic Party would become a majority over time. Even then, I pushed back and said, Rui, you're not right about this. Is Latino voters specifically, but all voters of color are going to change. And in fact, that's what we started to see in about 2012, 2014, 2016. This rightward shift is emblematic of the Latino community specifically moving away from a race and ethnic focused voter bloc and towards a class and cultural voter. And it's extraordinarily significant, not just because it's going to have political ramifications, but it's a broader sign, I think, of a new social understanding of the way we view non-white people, because in this country we will be a non-white majority in 8 years for the first time in American history. And so I think the book ultimately is very optimistic about pluralism, as I call it. We're going to move beyond sort of the tribal enclaves we've built up right now and what that means as we become more comfortable with a truly diverse, pluralistic society. And again, when a lot of people are very nervous and afraid of what's happening to democracy right now, I'm actually quite optimistic for scientific, mathematic, and demographic reasons. I think the solutions to what ails us is literally inside of us demographically.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious. Before I ask the next question, I have to ask for the YouTube audience, like, what's that a picture of behind you? It looks like the Dos Equis guy. from,
That's a picture of that's a Lincoln portrait.
oh, okay.
And I have it's funny because I have this kind of stately office with the Lincoln portrait, but to my right here are Frederick Douglass
Mm-hmm.
and Thaddeus Stevens,
Mm-hmm.
who in my estimation were kind of the three real founders of republicanism, modern republicanism. And what we often forget is the Republican Party was the first party, is based largely on an abolitionist movement.
Mm-hmm.
It was a social movement about the need to change our democracy and expand the American idea to include non-white people.
Mm-hmm.
And Frederick Douglass, a truly remarkable American, always had a very uneasy relationship with the Republican Party. Because he understood the biology was a big part of who human beings are. And while there was a very strong component of the abolitionist wing of the party, he was very disappointed after the Civil War in the way segregation started to take place during Reconstruction. So anyway, long way of saying I've got a lot of Republicanness around me. I too have a very, very uneasy relationship with the Republican Party for a lot of the same reasons these three gentlemen did.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I mean, today's Republican Party looks nothing like it did, I don't know, 50 years ago. And then 50 years prior to that, it didn't look anything like it did,
Yeah.
and it's like the same can be said about the Democratic Party too, right? Like
Yeah.
the Democrat Party electing the first black president, like who would have thunk, right? Like,
Right.
and I'm curious, like, so in after Obama won a second term, I know that the RNC wanted to do like this, big autopsy, or I think they called it like the Growth and Opportunity Project, GOP or something. And it was sort of like structured to, enlist or recruit more people of color or whatnot. And kind of based on everything that I'm hearing you say, and even Patrick Ruffini say, it's like, it's almost like it's happening, but it's very organic. It doesn't necessarily seem like it's the result of very objectionable actions that somebody in the party took. Like would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a lot of, regardless of what happens in the November elections, there's going to be a lot of revisiting of the idea of the autopsy for exactly the reasons you mentioned. There's no question that the viability of the Republican Party going forward is going to require it to become a more multi-ethnic, more racially diverse party. That's just math. That was the argument made in the autopsy. Donald Trump proved that wrong, but the math still gets harder every year. But ironically, and this is why I love politics, is very oftentimes people are right, but they're right for the very wrong reasons. And this is a perfect example of that. Is when I argue this in the book, Republicans are becoming more diverse despite their best efforts, not because of them. It's happening for demographic, social, and political reasons that frankly stand in contrast to what is happening in the Republican Party. So let me give you some examples and then I'll try to explain how that can be. A lot of our politics is absolutely focused obsessively on Donald Trump. So most people, me in the media, will ask me, what is Donald Trump doing to attract these voters? And the answer really is he's not. And let me explain that a little bit more. If you look at Ron DeSantis in Florida, governor of Florida, Greg Abbott, governor of Texas, Doug Ducey, the last Republican governor of Arizona, Brian Dahle, the Republican nominee that ran against Gavin Newsom in California, they all have something in common that's pretty extraordinary. They all significantly, well, in Greg Abbott's case, met the same threshold of Hispanics vote of that Donald Trump got, but in the other three instances exceeded considerably the number of Hispanic support that Donald Trump got. And that same data holds true in all of the congressional and legislative districts, meaning Republicans down ticket were doing better than Donald Trump has been, which is very clear data and evidence that Donald Trump is actually restricting the rightward shift. It would be much bigger without him. It's actually his vulgarity, his language, the racist nativist sentiment that is limiting that growth. But it's also a demonstration of how strong the economic message is when Latino voters will vote for that, regardless of the fact that he's being insensitive or offensive to their own ethnic and racial sensibilities. Like, I may not like the fact that the guy is racist, but I support what he's doing policy-wise because I got to pay rent and I got mouths to feed. And we've got to remember that. It's really important because when we start to fall into this trap of saying, how can Latino voters vote for somebody who wants to build a wall or separate families from their kids, from parents from their kids, or put kids in cages? Those are all very legitimate questions, but they're not Latino questions. They're human questions. They're questions that we all should be asking ourselves. And as Latinos become less ethnically anchored and view themselves more typically as a blended multiracial American, which is increasingly common, it starts to explain why this shift is happening. One last quick point on this. I paused when I said shift because I actually don't believe that what we're seeing is a shift or a realignment. And the reason is because a realignment presupposes that people were voting one way and are now voting a different way. That's actually not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is the emergence of a new vote. 40% of these voters voted in 2016 or more recently. Over 20% of Latinos will be voting for this for the first time this November. So the dramatic transformation ethnically that is happening, this explosion, is extremely new. So it's not shifting, it's actually just becoming something different that is unique and very different than what we have seen in the past. And again, it's challenging our notions of literally what minority means in this country.
It sounds like the Latino bloc in particular at some level is beginning to challenge a lot of the previous assumptions and paradigms that people had both on Democrat and Republican sides. And I'd love for you to speak to how the unique identity and cultural experiences of Latino voters, how has that challenged these traditional paradigms, and why do you think it's challenged the traditional paradigm? So why is it that, again, you had this guy who many would consider to be racist or have very racist feelings towards, say, a large bloc like the Latino vote, and yet they would still vote for him on economic reasons? What's driving that?
Such a great question. That was really kind of the big struggle of the book, is literally that question. So thanks for asking it. We have to remember, and again, I think, let me try to explain it from a number of different ways because it's a really big but very important question. The Latino vote of the last 30 years was overwhelmingly a foreign-born, Spanish-speaking, recently migrated vote and voter. But immigration, both legal and illegal, dropped considerably in 2007, about 17, 18 years ago now. And it happened when we went into what we called then the Great Recession. As the economy soured, people stayed home, there weren't the opportunities to keep working here. What happened then was an explosive growth of second and third generation Latinos. So the massive growth that we're seeing on the voter rolls right now is overwhelmingly second, even larger with the third, and even now immeasurably fourth generation voter. And every generation is looking different politically. So much so that first generation, the recently naturalized, is looking entirely like 180 degrees different than their grandchildren. Their grandchildren are English dominant, almost English exclusive, speak no Spanish, very common. Will, you know this from Southern California. Probably had a lot of friends who were Latino, Hispanic surnames, didn't speak a lick of Spanish. Maybe they'd been here a couple, 3 generations. That's where all the growth in the Latino vote is going to be. So for the next 30 years, at least for the next generation, what is motivating the largest block of Latino voters is not going to be immigration. It's not going to be farm workers issues. It's not going to be issues related to the undocumented. And it's going to be a more culturally, socially, and politically moderate voting bloc. Because that first generation was 75% or more Democrats. This is why you hear Republicans saying the Democrats want to allow as many illegals as possible to register them because they're all Democrats. It's really an outmoded notion of race. What you're seeing, though, is by the third generation, half or more of these voters are Republicans. Now, incidentally, Latinos have the least partisan anchoring, meaning we are the most likely to be registering as independents or not affiliate with either Republicans or Democrats. Of all the 4 major race and ethnic groups in the country, Latinos by a significant margin are the most anti-party. They're not registering or affiliating with either party. And so understanding the nuances between these generational differences, Josh, is really critical to understanding why Republicans, why Republicans are getting more of this fast-growing third-generation voter, because by the third generation, they don't see themselves all that differently than, frankly, the other blue-collar, folks on the construction site or in the manufacturing industry or in the energy patch in the Rio Grande Valley or in agriculture or in manufacturing or mining. Latinos are the fastest growing group of the blue collar workforce. And as a result, they're voting like the blue collar workforce, right? And so this transformation from the minority model of saying these are race-based, ethnically focused issues on immigration, farm workers issues, to a larger group now of Latinos that are saying those aren't issues to us at all. Like, I don't relate to them at all. They're not even a top 5, top 7, top 10 issue. I'm focused on paying the rent. I'm worried about your energy policy. I believe the Democratic Party is trying to put me out of work because a lot of these regulatory issues. And that's what's driving most of this. Again, it's not a shift, it's an emergence. It's a changed voting bloc, unique in American history.
That's fascinating. I love I think it's very helpful, the language of it's not a shift, an emergence, because that's that really helps me to think of it correctly. And, I just had a quick follow up, and I'm not sure how much data you have on this or how much research you've been able to do, but is rather the Latino bloc, like especially in this third generation, are they having more children than other ethnic minorities or categories? And does that play any part of this, that kind of family unit, extended family, all that? Because all of my friends growing up, all of my Hispanic friends, and I have many, some of my best friends growing up were Cuban and El Salvadorian, and all of them,
big
family, huge family,
yeah,
and they got together all the time,
yeah,
and they connected all the time, and I'm like, wow, we don't have anything like this in my family, and I just don't know,
there's
what role that plays.
Yeah, there's so much to that. There's this cultural issue and challenge. So let me speak a little bit about that. Let me try to get to the question. The first is Latinos tend to overwhelmingly. I shouldn't say that. Latinos, by a larger number, live in multi-generational households. So it's not uncommon to have a bunch of kids. You probably saw this running around, saw this when you were growing up in your neighborhood. Mom and dad are at work. Kids are there. Grandparents are also there, maybe raising the kids. cousins live, just a block or two down, and there's
Yes.
always something going on the weekend with a big barbecue outside. That's very common, right? And it's not uncommon in countries and cultures from agrarian-based economies. It's not exclusive to Latinos. We've seen that from Eastern Europe and other areas as well. So, but it is a driving feature, because when we're talking about, quote unquote, family values, oftentimes when Republicans talk about family values, they're talking about their notion and perspective of the traditional family. When Latinos are talking about traditional or family values, it's a very different, broader, more communal perspective. And in fact, the individual isn't viewed in relation to their own accomplishments, where a white European Protestant family might be saying, hey, we're sending our kid to Cornell. We're very proud. In a Latino family, it's more, we want to send our kids to college so that they can lift everybody up. The individual is viewed in relationship to how they are perceived in the construct of everybody's benefit. And that's not a pejorative. It's just a different cultural perspective. Now, there are those cultural nuances, and you hear all the time, Latinos are not monolithic. Cubans are very different than Mexican Americans, who are very different than Puerto Ricans. And as we grow as a community, those differences are going to become larger and more significant. And they are based on a whole different set of criteria, as are white voters and African American voters and Asian voters. Income, education, gender. But the single largest demarcation continues to be generational differences. How far removed you are from the immigrant experience overwhelmingly dictates your political preferences. And it's why you're starting to see a lot of this behavior becoming more representative of the overall electorate, and it's starting to look a lot like the American mainstream electorate. Two other quick nuances I want to mention. The gender gap amongst Latinos is larger in voting behavior than it is with any other race group. Also, Latinas, by the third generation, much more Democratic. Men are shifting much more Republican, so there's a very large divide. And that's correlate to the education divide, where our women are going to college at a much faster and greater rate than our men, and that divide is also the largest of any race or ethnic group. And that's important because, as I argue in the book, the Latinization of America is also going to lead to a feminization of America, not in terms of effeminate characteristics, but just in terms of women leading our institutions. Certainly in politics, there are more Hispanic women in the California state legislature than there are Hispanic men. That's common in places like New Jersey. It's almost at parity in Florida, almost at parity in Texas. So we elect women at a much higher rate than any other race or ethnic group. So sorry to keep rattling on a bunch of probably nerdy statistics. We're going to pull in the weeds, but it's these small cultural nuances are going to change American democracy, and as I say, how America's largest minority is transforming democracy. One final data point: we have the highest interracial marriage rates of any race or ethnic group. We're a blended people by nature. We are half indigenous and half European descent. That's what a Latino is. But we've got really high intermarriage rates with whites, and really high intermarriage rates with African Americans, and really high intermarriage rates with Asian Pacific Islanders. So this is creating a truly pluralistic society that is allowing democracy and diversity to become more cohesive. It's breaking down the walls of tribalism and saying, my wife is half Hispanic and half African American. I'm half Asian and I'm half Latino. Our kids are, I don't even know what our kids are, right? Because there's so much. And what I believe is happening is it's allowing us to get back to the idea of America and saying that we are all endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. And at a certain point, when the racial construct is too confusing to even figure out, you're left with nothing but the idea of America. And I think that's a positive, beautiful development.
Oh, that's really well said. Yeah. So I'm the byproduct of a Black father. My mom is Vietnamese. My wife, who's from Indiana, is Polish and Italian. So like our kids are like like
Right.
like both of them have like different color skin tones
Yeah,
and
sure.
different complexion. Like my like one of my sons has like black straight like very Asian hair that like my mom has, and then my other child has like super curly, like it's gonna be like a white fro like when it's all said and done, you know.
Yeah.
And I love it, you know. I just
Yeah.
love just like how beautiful my children are and like how diverse they are. And yeah, and I really appreciated your point about just sort of, you know, the women kind of taking charge, because, you know, so at the time of recording this, Mexico is going to be holding an election where one way or another they're going to be getting their first woman president. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how that may affect, you know, the Latinization of America, and then maybe sort of the final question would be, how soon before we get a Latin American president?
But both great questions. And look, I'd spend a whole chapter on this idea that anybody who understands Latin American culture, not just Mexican, which is, by the way, the largest segment, overwhelmingly a segment of the Latinization of America is Mexican American. 60% of Latinos in
Wow.
America are of Mexican descent. And it's not that 60% is that big, but it's that everything else is so small. No other group hits double digits. So Puerto Ricans are like
Hmm.
9%, El Salvadorians are 7%, Cubans are 6%, and Nicaraguans and further down. But so the Mexican culture dominates the Latino diaspora, as it were. And I've
Wow.
always thought it was just fascinates me. I spent a good part of a chapter on this. My editor was, kind of saying, I think this is a little off topic, but I didn't care. We had a fight and I left it in the book. The idea that Mexico
Nice.
has as its national symbol the Virgin Mary, a woman, and not only a woman, but essentially a figure brought from the old world. This is a Roman Catholic symbol, right? And they use the Virgin Mary as the symbol of revolution. It is so it's so bifurcated in the mind of a blended people. It's like, I'm going to take this symbol of this religion that was brought and kind of imposed on us and use that same symbol as a revolutionary force to cast off the yoke of the people that did that, and yet still lean into the maternal side of our spirituality and nationality. That confusion is beautiful in its own human way. And it says so much about Latin American and culture. It's also, I think, in stark contrast to the way Americans perceive themselves. And what I mean by that is this, and it's a subtle but significant difference. I don't believe America could ever have a female symbol that we would broadly buy into. And I'm going to qualify this a little bit because Uncle Sam is our guy, right? The Statue of Liberty, which people say, well, what about Statue of Liberty? Statue of Liberty was a gift from France on our 100th anniversary, right? The French kind of said, here's liberty. We also have had notions of Columbia, which we called America before Uncle Sam. But there's a reason why Uncle Sam has stuck, and it's not a bad thing. I think it's been a great thing. It's part of our perspective. It's part of our national culture. It's part of our origins. But it is very much the way we perceive ourselves. And so this idea of this coming together, I think, is going to dramatically reshape things to the point where, I'm also an artist, and I mentioned this in the book. I've always tried to blend traditional American and Latino iconography together. I don't know if you guys have seen the cover of the book. Let me grab it real quick and show your viewers.
Yes.
It's kind of this American Gothic with
I
a
love it.
typical Latino community. And I painted paintings of the Virgin Mary and the Statue of Liberty blended like that too. And the idea is there's a lot of people who fear the coming change. I think it's going to make America more committed to the ideals set forth in our founding documents. And I wish this transition were easier, because I think a lot of our political strife and turmoil is predicated on the fears of a large swath of Americans thinking that we're losing what America is. The way I put it in the book is it feels like we're going through these death pangs, that something is dying. I prefer to see it as birth pangs, that something is emerging and being born that is truer to our creed.
Wow, that's awesome. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask, so we see this a lot with Christian nationalism, where you know Christian nationalists do their thing. They represent, a caricature of Jesus that isn't necessarily like who most Christians follow. So as a result of that, you see, reduced church attendance, and you see kind of just all the markers of just poor advertising by Christian nationalists. Now on the GOP side or the Republican side, you've got folks like Trump, who really has done a job on the Republican Party and has sort of restructured it or remade it into his own image. The basic principles of conservatism are still there. They're hidden somewhere. They're buried down underneath all the Trumpism. So like, how do you increase the demographic of the Republican Party to include more Latinos now when you have somebody like Trump that is, to your point, like making things worse for everybody, and definitely sort of being an obstacle for more people of color to kind of join the Republican Party that really support the ideals and principles that they stand for?
Fascinating question. Again, great questions, guys. Appreciate it. Let me say this too. We also, as a Latino community, have to acknowledge that there are the Enrique Terrios of the world, leaders of the Proud Boys, right? There's a strong strain of Latinos who are in white nationalist movement, in large part because, and again, racially, ethnically, for the moment anyway, Hispanics are white, at least on the census. Racially, we're white. Ethnically, we're Latino Hispanic. And there's oftentimes this need to demonstrate that whiteness, right? Because that's part of, of the way American culture has developed and American society has developed. And oftentimes there's this retrenchment and there is a Latino presence in white nationalist, white supremacist organizations. The question of Christian nationalism is a fascinating one. It's so fascinating. I spent past couple of years, literally while I was writing this book, looking at some of the ancient origins of this. And this is not a new feature, right? This is not exclusive to America, certainly globally. I went to Brazil during their elections with Bolsonaro and Lula. Most of the Bolsonaro support was coming from Protestant denominations with a very strong strain of Christian nationalism. That's what it was. A lot of this is also not organic. A lot of this is paid, sophisticated messaging that works to organize people in a very passionate, determined, and existential way, which is we are fighting a secular government. And so there's a righteousness about the religious being of a different world in support of Christianity that views the secular world as a threat to it. And that becomes a very strong motivator. Latinos, as we so often are somewhat in the middle. Our Catholicity, the historical Catholicity, has never been a political or social motivator. It's offered a perspective, but I remember growing up with Ronald Reagan and Jack Kemp and saying, Latinos are Republican, they just don't know it yet. Kemp would say this are, culturally conservative, socially conservative. The truth of the matter is, even though we would poll slightly more conservatively than the American public on things like the abortion question, for example, that was never a compelling issue for Latino voters. Abortion is legal in Mexico. Marriage equality is legal in Mexico. They're about to elect their first woman. There's just a lot of stereotypes are being broken down. But there is a growing strain of white evangelical Christians that are motivated by this. In fact, a lot of the rightward shift, where there is a shift, not an emergence, but a shift, is a lot of first and second generation voters that are moving from Democrat to Republican as they move from being Catholic to evangelical. And when that happens, you are starting to see them voting more like white evangelicals. So Latino evangelicals don't vote as Republican as white evangelicals, but they don't vote as Democrat as black evangelicals. Once again, there's a blending where Latinos are literally in the middle, right? There's so many ways that there's glue that is creating the ability for us to actually have a conversation with one another across faith lines, economic lines, political lines. And the first chapter of the book I call Beyond Black and White, because it allows us to actually see things from a different blended perspective where we're not really a threat to either. There's a legitimacy to both sides that I think is very healthy. I think it's a way for us to actually get past sort of some of our original sins and not make white folks, frankly, so defensive, because that's kind of what we've developed in the last 10, 20, 30 years, where it's being a white guy is kind of, you're the worst thing ever just by being a white guy. And it's not right. That's not fair. That's not accurate. And it's not healthy. It's just not. Mm-hmm. And so we've got to develop a different vernacular of the way we talk about race that is not so bipolar. And if we can do that, maybe we can actually fix a lot of things. And maybe I'm being Pollyannish, but that's kind of what I've seen. And I think the faith question is one of those. Is like I said, Latinos are the moderates in both parties. They kind of understand and have a lived experience on both sides, but culturally, generationally, and biologically. That's what we are. And so as a result, I think that there's more of a proclivity to be like, yeah, I get both sides. We're going to have to come to some sort of a consensus on this. And I'm not going to put up with the crazy extremes of the right, but I'm also not going to put up with the crazy extremes of the left. Like you're both not getting it right. And we've constituted our parties on this bipolar spectrum where if you're not with us, you're against us. Moderation or negotiation or compromise is a vice. It's not a virtue anymore. And when you're kind of a people that are blended anyway, you're kind of like, I can't really, it's not an either or decision for me. It's right. Both.
I mean, I just love it that, and number one, I would love if like the trends that you're talking about come about and there's this moderate sense and culture that emerges and starts to take its ascendancy, and the whites on either side, the right and left, in their extremes, come to this place. Like, I would just love it if it was the Latino and the ethnic minority votes that actually were the ones, right, that did the things that we're all trying to say we want to be moderate and all this stuff, but we're not. We're shifting so much. And of course the percentage of white people that go vote is at least from what I understood, is still the largest of any ethnic.
By a lot, yes.
Right, any ethnic minority. But I think that would be awesome, because just even as a faith leader, just seeing how God works in ways that we don't understand and we can't predict, and through people that we would have disregarded. That's just the way that he works, and I'm all for that. I was gonna, you kind of addressed what my question was going to be more about the faith of the Latino bloc and how much that is affecting things. You kind of addressing that. You're welcome to talk more about that, but I would love, you've mentioned a few times with this kind of implication of the failure of both parties to truly reconcile with the Latino vote. Yeah. And I would love if you would get even a little bit more in depth on how have the Republican Democratic parties really failed, and is there an opportunity for, like, let's say the Libertarian Party or something like that, a third party to come up, capture this kind of vote, because they're capturing the sense of the more moderate or whatever sense of where people are at, and even actually bring some real competition and get people the powers that be to start shaking in their boots a little bit
Yeah.
and wondering and needing to change so that they can actually stay in office.
Yeah. Again, I'm loving this conversation. I appreciate where you guys are coming from on this. Let me say this. I think let me try to push the answer this way. I believe very firmly that the party that's going to dominate American political discourse in the next 25, 30 years is going to be the party that is able to capture the hearts and minds of a multi-ethnic working class aspirational people of all, yeah, multi-ethnic. It's not just Latinos or African Americans or whites. It's all of them, because that's what we're becoming. And the Democratic Party has, this is going to be a shocker to some people. I think it still kind of sets people back. The Democratic Party is really no longer the party of the working class. They believe that they are. They believe that in their history and tradition, through the labor movement and FDR's New Deal, all of that was true, but it's not the case anymore. And that's not Mike Madrid saying that. That's working class people saying that. That's what Patrick Ruffini's book argues very, I think, elegantly and accurately. Now, the Republican Party, for its part, has always had a problem with the multi-ethnic part, or not always, but recently, in the last since the Civil Rights Movement in '64, with the Civil Rights Act, and so it's been an overwhelmingly white party. And what's happening is then orthodoxy sets into both parties after 30, 40, 50 years of doing this, where Democrats become convinced of the idea that all non-white people are essentially the same. And we need to treat all non-white people as some level of oppressed and have some sort of policy that says that's the answer. And there's some shades of truth to that, but not to the point where when you become a truly multiracial, multicultural country, that works anymore. And that's where we're at. Now, for their part, the Republicans basically say, well, if you just drop your hyphen at the door and quit talking about your differences, and we're just American, which in many ways just means be white or be as white as you can be, and we'll accept you, right? That's kind of what what the movement has always been about. The idea of the melting pot is relatively new. It came about under Teddy Roosevelt's administration during the progressive Republican era, when they were trying to stamp out these sort of the corruption at Tammany Hall. It was a way to get the Irish from quit creating a political machine, and to stop the Italians from creating their own political machines and using patronage to financially back tribalism. It was saying, let's create a new nation called American. And there's no more hyphens. You drop your hyphen at the door, you stop with the culture, you become American. We're going to create a new hybrid nation. And that's not the way human beings work. Like, we create culture for a reason. We have history and tradition for a reason. They go back centuries. It gives us an anchor in this world. It's why religion is so central to the human experience. It links us not to our God and to ourselves. It links us to those who came before us and to those who will come after us. That is really important. Culture is really important to human beings as a survival mechanism. Our religion, our faith, our culture, our traditions, our dance, our holidays, all of it. And so American, like you were mentioning earlier, you saw all these people kind of practicing their culture when you were growing up, and you kind of lacked a lot of that, right? But that's not the way your family behaved. And I'm not saying one is better or worse. I'm just saying that's how and why it developed.
Absolutely.
And so you can't impose culture. You can't just be like, okay, everyone's going to eat hot dogs on the 4th of July, and the eagle is going to be on, screaming eagle is going to be on her shoulder, and we're going to have flag waving and fireworks, and that's culture. That's not how it works. And so we're really struggling with Americans with this, with what the American identity is going to be. And that's why I think there's so much cultural tension, and why it's so easy for politicians to tap into those insecurities and say, we need to go back to the way things were. We need to make America great again. We need to revert back to a time when we had more semblance and control, not necessarily in an authoritarian way, although I think that's the case, but just in a way that I understand the rules of the game of what it means to be an American. And things were more orderly because we crave that as human beings. When change is happening too fast, we start to spin out of control. That's just our biology. And the pace of technological and cultural change right now is overwhelming people. And they're seeking spirituality as an answer. They want that structure. And that's the danger of where the Christian nationalist comes in, because it says, here's the specific answer. God is an American. Jesus is a Republican. This is a divine place on earth, and behave along to Republican principles because that's what Christian principles are. There's nothing Christ-like about that. I think you guys would agree with that. Is Christ was not coming to affirm the United States of America. He was bringing a message to humanity about salvation. Like, that's what Christianity is. And until we encompass that again as a faith, and reject the political toxicity of the faith community. It's not just the faith community, by the way. This is not a pejorative or an attack on the faith community. It's happening in all sectors. You can't be a football fan unless you agree or disagree on who can kneel. You can't be a Taylor Swift fan unless, you agree with her politics. Like, it's everything. We've injected this into everything now, because half of us are afraid of the future and half of us are very welcoming of it. Half of us want to go back to 50 years ago, and half of us are like, we're so glad it's not 50 years ago. And as every day, and again, I make this argument too, and I apologize for the long diatribe here, but every day, I believe there's a demographic solution to this. Every day in America, 10,000 new people, largely non-white, obviously younger, turn 18 every day. And every day, 7,500 people die. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying what it means is we are changing quickly. Like, we're just, from an actuarial table, America's changing really fast. And that's upsetting to any human being, that kind of change. I understand why people are scared. It's why I want to write the book. And it's an optimistic book. It's not designed to scare people. The cover might be a little,
I love the cover.
It might be a little provocative, but the point is, this is still American iconography. This is still America. It's truer to our creed, but that doesn't take anything from the history and the legacy and the beauty and the elegant solutions that the founders created. It's an homage to it. It honors it. And I believe that when we come out of these tortured, dark days, and we're going to be a better people. I believe that.
It's funny. So, like, I grew up Southern California, born in LA, Kaiser Hospital. My first memory of interacting with anybody Latino, and this will sound probably bad if you're not from Southern California, but like, my dad was doing some work on the house and he needed some extra labor. And
Yeah.
so, like, in California, at least at the time, I'm sure it's probably still the same. Like, he would drive down to the local Home Depot in the truck and, like,
Yeah.
just be like, 4 guys, 5
Jump in the
guys.
back.
Yeah. Jump in the back, and they
Absolutely.
come to our house, they do work, and then they leave. But, like, they were all pretty cool dudes, I mean? And, like, I was like 2nd, 3rd grade, so I mean, what I know, But so a lot of my views about just diversity, Latinos, whatnot, it's really kind of colored from, like, my early days of growing up and just being around it. My mom was Asian, my dad is Black, and there's all these Latinos in my backyard, So, like,
Yeah.
But that might be true for a certain segment of America that's ready to sort of, like, take that next step in seeing how America looks. So I'm curious, and this is sort of an add-on to the previous question I asked about how long before we get a Latino president, and
Oh, sorry.
and then maybe, or if that's an unanswerable question, which it kind of is, like, how long before you think America would be ready for a Latino president?
I'm not sure when, right? That's kind of unanswerable, but I will say this. If all goes according to what Mike Madrid is predicting, it's not going to matter. There won't be as much of a celebration about a first Latino president, because hopefully we will have diffused it so much it won't matter, right? And a lot of people, a lot of Latinos will criticize me for saying that, and that's okay. I've taken a lot of criticism for Latinos over the years. I'm Republican, so I mean, we're started there. But the point is, I think the hope is, as a naturally mixed race, multi-ethnic people, there's only so much that those markers are getting us politically. And I think that we are truly a healthy American society when nobody notices. If it were to happen and everyone's like, oh yeah, oh, it happens to be, Kamala Harris. I mean, look at Kamala Harris. Everyone knows she's African American, but no, she's also the first AAPI, right? I mean, she's half Asian. And we don't talk about that nearly as much because we're not able to as Americans. We have such a construct of America being a black and white country because of our original sin. And I get that. And I understand that. But at a certain point, that has to become, demography and biology has to do what our Constitution and our laws and our social constructs were not able to do. And that's the hope. That's hopeful. That's what allows us to get back to America being an idea, America being an idea. Because when we're not, we devolve into every other government that was before us that we were supposed to transcend. It becomes a blood and soil country. And that's the danger of the moment, is there are people that just want to say, no, America's a white Christian nation. And that once that happens, if that were to be successful, I don't think it will be, but if it were to be, the idea of America dies with that. You're no different than France in, the 11th century. You're no different than, the fights between the English crown and the Pope in Rome.
Yeah.
We're no different. The great hope of America, American exceptionalism, the shining city on the hill, is to transcend that and protect the people religious. That was the idea, is everybody can come here and practice and worship in the way that you do. Everybody, not just people of a certain religious affiliation. And we should be doing more to protect religious freedom and people religious, because I think that's very healthy for our society. But we can't, if we devolve into one tradition, the idea of America is extinguished. It becomes the same type of monarchy that defined most of Western European history.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I am what you say is very compelling. I'm very sympathetic to it, and it is very challenging in good ways for me to hear it, to be thinking about it. And I appreciate that you wrote this book, and I would love for you, kind of in our last just couple moments, and then I have just a final question after this about just some practical things, how people can follow you and things like that. But that's not the right way to put it. What do you want this book to accomplish? Overall, big picture, if you're speaking to a wide audience, why do you want them to read it? What do you want it to accomplish in the next season?
Let me start by thanking you both for the time and the platform and your brains and your great questions. The main reason why I wrote this book now, and again, I've been studying this for 30 years and probably could have written something similarly over the past 30 years, but the reason why I felt compelled to write it now at this moment was because despite all of the social tension and anxiety that we all feel, regardless of your political persuasion, because of all of the dramatic reforms that people want to impose, because of the collapsing confidence in our institutions, there's a lot of signs and evidence that the guardrails of American democracy and even the republic itself feel like they're collapsing. What I wanted people to understand is that there is something very optimistic and hopeful that is emerging, not just to save the republic as we've known it, but to actually make the idea of America more true and more profound than at any time in our 250-year history. there is something good emerging right now. There's something great emerging right now. And as you know, Pastor, these moments of greatness and realization, they necessarily require struggle and pain and this
Yes.
torturous experience. That's what the human condition is, and that's no different than nations and societies and a global species. It's required. And if we have faith in that, and we have belief in who we are and in our ideas, I think we can rest a little bit easier during this extraordinary time. And I also want to make it very clear, I did not plan to write an optimistic book. It was designed to be a critique, but about 2/3 of the way through, I realized all of the seeds of everything that I've been working on for decades are pointing in this positive direction. And so that left me with great hope and great optimism and great faith about where this is all at going forward. And so what I want people to walk away when they close the cover on the book on the last page is saying, not despite our troubles, but because of our struggles, we are becoming a better America. We are forging the character required to be an America in this next century. That's why I called it the Latino Century. We are becoming a democracy that is required of the digital age as we have moved out of the industrial age. There are new technologies, new economies, and new complexions that are going to challenge the notions and ideas of what we've historically known as being American for 250 years. We are going to meet and exceed and transcend all of those. I have complete confidence in it. And that's why I wrote the book. And that's what I'm hoping is it gives people a little bit more of a roadmap and understanding as to why I feel so confident about that.
Well, I got to say that you are one of, I think, the first person that we have talked to about the current state and is coming out in an optimistic way. We've interviewed a lot of authors, and a lot of times we ask them, I mean, Will can attest to this. What hope do you have? And they'll, I don't have much hope. I don't know. And it's like, man, we need voices of hope because by and large, it's not just what's happening, but it's the voices that people are going to listen to.
Yeah.
Because we can, and the ways that we can connect to hope, that's how we can continue to move. Like, yeah, there is something to be hopeful for. We don't need to be like, we need more voices of hope. There are plenty of voices of doom. We need a lot more voices of hope because I think there is a way in which it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy
For
if
sure.
we are
Yeah.
not listening to voices of hope. And we do not want that. And so I think it's awesome. I appreciate you writing the book. How can people
Yeah.
follow you and how can they pick up the work?
Thanks again. Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter or X, however you refer to it, at Madrid_Mike. You can find the book, just Mike Madrid, The Latino Century. You can find it at Barnes & Noble or Amazon, or just go directly to the Simon & Schuster link. If you put Mike Madrid, The Latino Century in your search bar anywhere, it's going to take you right to it. The book is officially released on June 18th, but all the pre-sales and pre-orders would be helpful, and it's coming in a couple short weeks. If you don't mind buying it, supporting it, helps kind of amplify the voice, and I really appreciate it. And thank you both so much for the time. I really appreciate sharing some ideas with you guys.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And well, to our folks listening and watching, this has been Mike Madrid on his new book, The Latino Century. Want to make sure you guys pick that up and read it. Comes out June 18th. If you're listening after June 18th, go buy it because it's already out, 2024. And we appreciate everything, guys. Appreciate your time and attention and listening. And until next time, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. God bless you. Have a great day.